The train now arriving at Platform 1 will contain strong views and language. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you, and please mind the gap.
Hi, I'm Jeff, aka the Cynical Biker, and at the risk of sounding cynical, is this a good time to bury bad news? If you were a Labour MP back in 2001, that phrase will be familiar to you. You would have read it in an email from Joe Moore, aide to the then Transport Secretary, Stephen Byers. She'd just watched the two jets smashing into New York's Twin Towers, and as we'd all been staring at our screens in disbelief, Joe Moore had been sending an email to colleagues calling it a good day to bury their bad news. When that email surfaced, despite the public outrage, Joe Moore kept her job. But just like David Blunkett and Peter Mandelson before her, she just couldn't resist an encore. The loss of 3,000 souls on 9/11 wasn't enough, but disrespect her dead royal at your peril. So when Princess Margaret's death had been filling the front pages, she'd repeated her advice, and Joe Moore was gone. Her boss, Stephen Byers, he kept his job and continued failing his way up the ladder. Even when he was caught reclaiming £125,000 in rental expenses for an apartment that he wasn't renting, he survived. It took a Channel 4 sting operation to finally end his career in politics. With Channel 4 posing as lobbyists, Stephen Byers promised to make their clients' dreams come true. A cab for hire is how he described himself, and if they paid the fare, he'd be happy to take them anywhere. His asking rate had been £5,000 a day. But of course, he'd walked away from Westminster with no criminal record and a pension fully funded by the taxpayers he'd been scamming. Normally, the political misdeeds and scandals that are centre stage today get overshadowed by those stepping out of the wings tomorrow. Deny, deflect, delay, dissolve. You know, there was no party in Downing Street. I did not attend a party in Downing Street. Oh look, Sue Gray is investigating. Oh look, the Metropolitan Police are investigating too. Oh look, Cressida Dick seems to have walked the plank. Oh look, Putin's invading Ukraine. And look, I know it's not important right now, but there was no party in Downing Street that I didn't attend. It works like a dream, every fucking time. Now, P&O sacking 800 of its British workers, that was some bad news, and way too big to be buried under anything, even Ukraine. However, just because that story hit the public flat in the face, it doesn't mean that a plethora of subshit fuckeries haven't been deliberately shielded in the shadows. On the face of it, P&O's announcement seemed to take everybody by surprise. Well, it was obviously a shock to the 800 workers who were told via a Zoom call that they were being replaced by cheaper humans. Mind you, it also came as a surprise to the 800 cheaper humans who'd been waiting outside of the ports on buses. Their only crime had been responding to job adverts and were told that they would be crewing a new fleet of vessels. So they had no idea about the shitstorm that P&O had been sending them into. Facing 800 sacked angry seafarers screaming scab at you isn't the best start to any new job, but the news seems to have caught the RMT off guard as well. The RMT are the specialist trade union, the trade union who represent most of P&O's 800 sacked workers, and in a statement on March 17th, RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch said, "We are deeply disturbed by growing speculation that P&O are today planning to sack hundreds of UK seafarers and replace them with foreign labour." Mick Lynch had every right to feel deeply disturbed, but his statement only mentioned UK seafarers, and that's because when it comes to actions like fire and rehire or other corporate shitfuckery, workers from European member countries have legal rights. Apparently, those unelected bureaucrats in Brussels take a dim view of actions like hire and refire. Sadly, the United Kingdom are no longer members of the European Union, but when it came to Brexit, can you guess which way the RMT encouraged its union members to vote? You really can't make this shit up, but when in 2016 the RMT encouraged all of its members to vote leave, maybe they were having an off year. And last year, when they encouraged the TUC to block any possibility of a second referendum on Europe, maybe they were having another one. Maybe the RMT believed that after abandoning the labour protections of Europe, the UK government would introduce new labour protection laws that were even more robust than those we'd be leaving behind. Because, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Dominic Raab, Matt Hancock, and Jacob Rees-fucking-Mogg, they're famous for valuing the rights of workers over the profits of their wealthy chums and donors. As I say, you really can't make this shit up. We all knew that leaving Europe would mean leaving those strong labour protections behind us, but to those at the top, that had been a benefit rather than a bug. Whilst persuading this famous nation of shopkeepers to tell its 27 best customers to fuck off, they'd also convinced us that we didn't need workers' rights or even human rights, because, well, the only workers and humans thinking that rights were important would be snowflakes, social justice warriors, or heavens forbid, the woke, right? In their defence, Labour were quick to recognise the danger, but when they introduced a bill to make actions like P&Os illegal, after claiming that it would put British jobs in jeopardy, the Tories had gleefully voted it down. At the time, I can't remember the RMT union calling its members to arms. In fact, I can't remember them saying much about it at all. But one person who did vote against Labour's bill was the Conservative MP, the Honourable Member for Dover, Natalie Elphicke, OBE. Natalie Elphicke became MP for Dover in 2019, at the general election where, after promising to get Brexit done, voters returned Boris Johnson to Downing Street with a working majority. It's confusing, but Dover's previous MP was also called Elphicke, but after being found guilty on 3 counts of serious sexual assault, even the Tories realised that serving his constituents from a prison cell would have been something of an optical challenge. Natalie Elphicke had been one of Charlie Elphicke's constituents, and the reason they'd shared a surname was that for 25 years, Charlie and Natalie Elphicke had been married. When the first 2 unrelated allegations of serious sexual assault surfaced, one assault on a young member of staff working at his own house in Kent, and the other on a young member of staff working at the People's House in Westminster, the Conservatives had quite rightly suspended him. However, when Theresa May had needed the votes, no points for guessing what happened next. Of course, Charlie Elphicke's whip had been restored, and seeing her boss skipping back into the office with an arrogant smile can't have been pleasant for the 3rd young employee who'd just accused him of sexually assaulting her too. But, Theresa May had needed the votes. When the jury found Elphicke guilty on 3 charges of serious sexual assault and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, Natalie Elphicke had been angry. 3 female employees, all half a husband's age, had independently accused him of sexually assaulting them, and the jury had found him guilty. So after 25 years of marriage, she'd had every right to be angry. My husband Charlie has been punished for being charming, wealthy, charismatic, and successful. Attractive, and attracted to women. All things that in today's climate have made him an easy target for dirty politics and false allegations. It was obvious to me, from reading the evidence during lockdown, that the criminal allegations against him were complete nonsense, and I still believe they are. Paid, I believe, £25,000 for that article in The Sun. Nice work, if you can get it. Well, unlike her heroine Margaret Thatcher, after announcing their separation, Natalie Elphicke seemed to make an unexpected U-turn. And whilst my compassion goes out to her charming and charismatic husband's 3 victims, and any more who haven't found the courage to step forwards yet, hers obviously does not. Well, when Natalie Elphicke saw the cameras gathering at the docks in her Dover constituency and hurried down to join the angry P&O workers on the picket line, she showed the world exactly who she was. With the cameras pointing, she'd clenched her fist, punched the air to the rhythm, and joined in with their chant of "Shame on you, shame on you, shame on you." It seemed to take her a few seconds to realise, but the sacked workers had no longer been pointing their angry fingers towards the offices of P&O Ferries, but directly at her. It seems that some of them had been paying attention and knew that she'd voted against the Labour bill that would have saved their jobs. Even after realising that their anger was being directed at her, it had been like water off a snake's back. She'd moved away from the angry crowd, and instead pumped her fist for the more amiable cameras, and as I'd watched her doing it, I'd thought, well, there's another fucking beauty that Alanis Morissette missed. Natalie Elphicke is the MP who tweeted about Marcus Rashford. You know, when after taking a knee before the game, he'd missed that penalty for England at the end of it. In her opinion, rather than wasting his time trying to feed hungry kids, which in her opinion was playing politics, Marcus Rashford should, in her opinion, have spent more time practicing his shooting skills. And, in my opinion, rather than spending her Christmas Day rage-tweeting about refugee families crossing the English Channel in small boats, Natalie Elphicke MP should have been thanking her lucky stars that her family were lucky enough not to have been born in the wrong place and time. Of course, by the next election, this will have all blown over, overshadowed and replaced by more shitfuckery from others. She's already received an OBE and made vice chair of the Conservative Party. And after winning again at the next election, what's the betting that Natalie Elphicke will be rewarded with a nice little number in cabinet? It doesn't matter which side of the political fence you lean on. You all know that MPs of every hue have a nasty habit of failing their way to the top. Now, here's the rub. Even now that we've left the European Union, sacking 800 workers and replacing them with 800 workers earning less than the minimum living wage is a complicated thing to do. So, P&O must have been planning this action for a while, probably ever since the terms of Brexit were confirmed. But when their 800 UK workers watched their livelihoods being stripped away on a Zoom call, the news had been a genuine surprise for them. The government had also seemed surprised. Dominic Raab was shocked. Kwasi Kwarteng was stunned. Priti Patel was startled, all of which suggested that they'd had no advanced knowledge of P&O's intentions. I can't say what our Prime Minister's reactions had been, because he'd been away promoting British industry abroad. Hours before P&O's announcement, Boris Johnson had been in the United Arab Emirates, or more specifically, in the Emirate of Dubai. He'd had a lengthy meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, but as the media were barred from that meeting, we've no way of knowing what they'd discussed. As the de facto leader of Dubai, Mohammed bin Zayed controls Dubai Sovereign Wealth Fund, which in turn owns DP World, which it turns out is the offshore investment vehicle that owns that most British of British companies, P&O Ferries. Despite the timing and unusual privacy for that meeting, it could have just been an unfortunate coincidence for both of them. It is possible that with the British Prime Minister sitting in his office, Mohammed bin Zayed simply forgot to mention the imminent sacking of 800 British workers. It could have been an oversight. But if several hundred foreign workers had been entering the UK and expecting to start work on the day of arrival, which government would have been responsible for issuing those hundreds of visas? Well, despite being all-powerful, I don't think it was those evil, unelected bureaucrats in the federal government of Europe. So, if the Dubai-owned P&O Ferries requested visas for hundreds of foreign workers to work in the United Kingdom legally, don't you think that at least one government minister might have asked what the fuck had been happening? Do you think that applying for 5, 6, 700 work visas at one time is something that would go unnoticed, or a process that could be completed overnight? Seeing the plight of refugees fleeing Ukraine, do you think that entering the UK has suddenly become an easy thing to do? Or do you think that the ministers claiming no prior knowledge of P&O's intentions is like Boris Johnson's claims that there were no parties in Downing Street? In other words, is this just another crock of political shitfuckery? Boris Johnson's back from Dubai now, and at Prime Minister's questions this week, he did seem miffed about what had happened.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we condemn the callous behaviour of P&O, and it is no way to treat hard-working employees. We will not sit by, Mr. Speaker. Section 194 of the Trades Union and Labour Relations Act of 1992. It looks to me, Mr. Speaker, as though the company concerned has broken the law. We will be encouraging workers themselves to take action under the 1996 Employment Rights Act. Both acts, Mr. Speaker, passed by Conservative governments.
Well, shiver my fucking timbers. Boris Johnson opened his mouth, and I didn't detect any lies coming out. Well, I'm sure there were a few, but the bills of 1992 and 1996 do exist, and were passed by Tory governments, and would make P&O's actions illegal. However, although Boris didn't lie, he certainly wasn't being honest with us. He forgot to mention that those particular bills were recently amended, and in those amendments, the Tories granted certain legal exemptions to a rather narrow sector of industry. And can you guess which very specific sector of industry benefited? Of course, companies involved in shipping. Or to be more specific, shipping companies like P&O Ferries, who despite sailing out of British ports and naming their vessels Pride of Kent, Pride of Canterbury and Spirit of Britain, are actually based in the Bahamas and Bermuda. You know, just like David Cameron's family money. Anyway, those amendments exempted them from having to follow the pesky labour laws that proper British companies did, and were tabled in 2018 by Chris Grayling MP. He was a keen Brexiteer, and at the time, the Tory Minister for Transport, and a few months after seeing his amendments pass into law, had stood down as the honourable member for Epsom and Ewell. P&O Ferries certainly weren't the only winners, and the organisation that benefited the most from Grayling's amendments was a company called Hutchinson Port Holdings. Amongst other things, they own the ports of Harwich, Felixstowe and Thamesport. And my grasp of geography must be shit, because I'd always believed that Harwich, Felixstowe and Thamesport were all located in England. As a dispatch rider, I thought I'd delivered packages to all of them. But I must be mistaken, because it turns out that all three of them are actually located in the British Virgin Islands. I'm never sure how many coincidences it takes before we can call it a conspiracy, but take a guess at which major corporation Chris Grayling left Parliament to work for. Of course, even before his leaving bouquet had wilted, Chris Grayling was enjoying a six-figure salary working for Hutchinson Port Holdings. And while you're on such a winning streak with your guessing, have a stab at how many days a year you think Hutchinson Port Holdings expect Chris Grayling to physically turn up to work. If you're holding up two hands, you're being way too kind to Chris Grayling. And I know it's lazy to keep mentioning Alanis Morissette, but those fuckers in Westminster make it impossible not to do it. And it is properly ironic that voting for Brexit has allowed 800 British workers to be replaced by low-wage foreign contractors. Call me cynical, but didn't they promise that leaving the European Union would have the opposite effect? It's getting difficult to remember who said what and when. The other day, I watched Health Minister Sajid Javid claiming that Boris Johnson hadn't compared Brits voting for Brexit to Ukrainians standing against Putin. And on the screen behind his head, Boris Johnson, giving that actual fucking speech, had been playing on an actual fucking loop. I'm minded to say the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. But quoting George Orwell is just as lazy as referencing Alanis Morissette. But it does seem ironic, because if Boris's bluster had been anything other than bullshit, wouldn't he use our rediscovered sovereignty to tear up P&O's operating licences? To nationalise their fleet of ferries? To reinstate the 800 sacked British seafarers? And to tell the unelected rulers in Dubai to go and royally fuck themselves? Well, that's what I'd do. But instead, he'll keep patting himself on the back for sequestering more Russian assets than anybody else. Keep hoping that nobody asks why that dirty money had all come to London in the first place. Keep charging £125,000 to play tennis with his friendly oligarch's trophy wife. Keep slipping the sons of KGB agents into the House of fucking Lords. And with the help of the people who keep supporting him, keep telling us that the best way to feed the hungry is to give bigger portions to his fat bastard friends from the Bullingdon Club. Blighty under Boris. Makes you proud to be British again. It's like a modern reflection of the good old days. You know, when we ruled the waves and monopolised the world's slave trade. Anyway, that's me exhausted for today. So keep your eyes peeled for those lovely Brexit benefits. Keep on minding the gap. And I'll be back with another little rant soon. Bye-bye now.